Salutations, everybody. Today's story starts in 1999. When my parents met, my dad worked in tech and media, and I have no idea what my mom did. About a year later, I was born on June 16th, 1999, which makes me 26 years old as of today. And fun fact, I was born in a bathtub, so Snoozy fun fact of the day for you. While I'm the oldest child of my parents, I actually have two older half-brothers, one from each of my parents. Having two older brothers from each parent meant that I didn't see them very often. My mom's son lived with his dad, and my dad's son having split custody with his mom when we lived in California. About a year after I was born, my mom got pregnant again and we moved to Florida, which is where she gave birth to my younger brother, who we'll call Eric. None of the names in this video are real for obvious reasons. When Eric was 2 and I was 4, we moved again, and while I can't remember much about this house, this is where I was introduced to gaming via my older brother's GameCube. By the time I was 5, we moved again, this time going back to California. Eric went to pre-K and I went to kindergarten before going on to first grade. My school life was very short-lived, as after my teacher had discovered my eczema and thought it was a contagious rash, she sent me home. And she also required a doctor's note to go back to school. My mom thought this was ridiculous and I never went back. Despite being so young, I never felt like I fit in at school, so at the time I didn't really have a problem with this. More time to play Club Penguin. So instead, my childhood was filled with going to parks, zoos, doing crafts, and the like. Early on, my mom did try with schoolwork, but over time, I think she got overwhelmed and couldn't keep up, which led to us practicing unschooling. Around this time, my parents got married and had a small ceremony that included just them, Eric, and myself. My mom started suffering from panic attacks. I remember one night I woke up at some unknown hour and found my mom on the floor throwing up. She had told me to go back to bed. We would frequently have to go to the hospital due to how bad they would get. I didn't know this at the time, but it was from my parents fighting a lot. Eventually, my mom stopped having as frequent panic attacks, and being a kid, I soon forgot about it. I had Puffles to take care of. One day, my dad gathered us kids and told us he had something to tell us. He sat all of us down on one of our beds and told us that he had type 2 diabetes. I remember him making a really big deal out of this, and because of that, I thought he was dying, but within a few months I realized he wasn't. Shortly after my 9th birthday, we packed up our 2-bedroom apartment and moved again. We moved a few states over and lived in a motel for 6 months before moving into a suburb. I actually quite liked living there, as there were kids on the street to befriend, and we went to a lot of unschooling groups in town. My mom got pregnant while we were living in a hotel, which led to the urgency of us finding a house. After living there for a couple months, my mom gave birth to my youngest brother, who we'll call Sam. Life was going pretty good. I had friends, a new baby brother, and my startle suite was looking very stylish. We lived there for only 9 months before our house had plumbing issues, which flooded the downstairs, so for the 5th time, we moved. We moved several states over again, and once again lived in a motel. We stayed there even longer than the first time. We celebrated birthdays, holidays, I got my first period, real fun stuff. Living in a motel room with 4.5 people and 2 cats was stressful, and my parents started fighting again, with my mom threatening to move herself and us kids to our grandma's. Eventually, my dad met someone at church who had a property for rent, and we finally moved into a bigger place. After about a year of living in this new place, my mom became pregnant again, this time with twins, and it was discovered that after having 4 brothers, I was finally going to get a little sister. My mom and I had a fantastic time during her pregnancy. We loved shopping for clothes, toys, whatever a baby girl could need. I prepared for her future by making startle accounts with her name so that one day she would have a good username. For those 9 months, I was extremely excited and hopeful. Then one day, my mom went into labor. If you couldn't tell already, my mom is a pretty hippy-dippy person, so once again she had a home birth. But this time, since she was having twins, she hired a midwife who could help. In the early hours of the morning, the midwife and her helpers came over, set up a big pool in her bedroom, and we waited. And waited. And waited. And then my mom went to the hospital. My dad stayed home with the kids. I remember a few hours passed when my dad got bored and wanted to walk us to Starbucks. I remember being there with Eric, who was 10, and Sam, who was barely 2 years old. I remember walking Sam's stroller around the Starbucks trying to calm him down, being only 12 myself. Eventually, we went home, and that's where we got the news. My mom and younger brother were fine, all things considered, but my sister was a stillbirth. This was the very first time I dealt with death. For me, this is the trigger point of a lot of my mental health issues. I experienced depression and suicidal thoughts for the first time. I started self-harming and generally being a depressed 13-year-old. During this time, I found Tumblr and I didn't feel so alone anymore. I met a lot of online friends who also struggled with these issues. I discovered fandoms, and while my mental health didn't improve, I felt like I was becoming a person for the first time with my own interest. Through Tumblr, I rediscovered my love of video games and YouTube. While I had discovered YouTube around the age of 6 due to LEGO stop-motion videos, I didn't really get into YouTube until I was 13. I discovered Minecraft YouTubers, and from Minecraft YouTubers, I got into other video games like Left 4 Dead 2, Garry's Mod, and horror games. Of course, I never played the horror games, I just watched Markiplier play them. I was enamored. I had found what I wanted to do with my life. Of course, being a young teenager with strict parents, I couldn't really do it. So I just continued to watch them and play video games where I pretended I was a Let's Player and talked to myself in my head. I started becoming a massive shut-in at this time, like most teenagers, and I didn't really do anything else. Not having school meant I could spend all my time online, which is exactly what I did. Now, all of the reasons teenagers shouldn't be online with unrestricted internet access happened, so quick trigger warning and quick side note. I got groomed, I got doxxed, I had older men come into my work when I was old enough to get a job. Blah blah blah. Let's move on from this quickly. It happened and it sucked, and holy shit, please don't let teenagers just use the internet without watching what they're doing. I don't exactly blame my parents for what happened, but we also didn't have a great relationship at this point, so I couldn't go and tell them when bad things did happen. I'm going to skip past all of the depressing teenager stuff really fast. When I was 17, I started streaming for the first time on Twitch. I had some online friends who helped me set everything up, and I went live playing Never-Ending Nightmares, a game I'd seen Markiplier play. While I don't use my first Twitch account now, I did use it for quite a few years, and that's how I met my partner, Gloomy, and some other friends who I ended up meeting and staying with during my first con, PAX East. I was almost 19, and while I had traveled a lot previously with my dad, this was my first time going someplace without my parents. After PAX East, I traveled to New York to meet my dad and Eric, who went there partly for my dad's work and partly to hang out with me. My dad's work had caused him to live separately from my mom, so I hadn't actually seen him for a few months at this point. This was a 2-day trip where we stayed in a hotel together and just hung around New York City. I met Jack's Films randomly on the street. It was a weird time. On the last day of our trip, my dad and I had a huge fight, which led him to kicking me out of my mom's house. My mom, not wanting to kick me out, went against what he said and allowed me to keep living there. A couple months later, I ended up moving into my friend's house, the one I stayed with during PAX East. Up until this point, I hadn't really discussed the worst of my teenage years. To say that my relationship with my parents was bad is an understatement. I got abused, and I didn't know how to include those parts in this story, so there you have it. If you've ever been abused and then moved out, your body reacts very strangely. It's so used to the constant fear that when you take that fear away, your body essentially crashes. I had the worst depressive episode of my life. I would have panic attacks nightly. I stopped streaming, which was pretty much the only thing that I enjoyed doing at the time, and I couldn't sleep, I couldn't function. I was just there, a sad, anxious blob of a person. A couple months later, my partner, Gloomy, visited me for the first time. We had been dating for about 6 months, and he was the very first person I dated that I met in real life. He took a month off of work and flew all the way from Australia to Boston. Not to be too ushy-gushy, but it was love at first sight, and a few months later, in February, I moved to Australia for the first time. Technically, I was only supposed to visit for a month, but I couldn't convince myself to leave, so I kept renewing my visa. Sorry, Australia. By this time, I had pretty much stopped streaming entirely, especially because if you've ever lived in Australia, you know that the internet here is quite bad. About 10 months went by when I discovered my first ever VTuber, Kidone, thanks to Gloomy. He had shown me a video of Kidone and oouuuuu playing Super Bunny Man, and I instantly fell in love with the idea. See, as an IRL streamer, I had already used an anime OC about half of the time, so I was already practically a VTuber just before it existed. It took me about a year of figuring out how it all worked, commissioning artists and such before I could properly debut. However, during this time, COVID happened. My parents separated, and my mom and younger brothers were basically homeless. So I moved back to the States for what I thought would be a couple of months to help them settle down. Like most people, I vastly underestimated COVID and its lockdowns and couldn't return to Australia for 2 years. During that time, I debuted as a VTuber, moved around 3 different times, took care of my family, cut off contact with my family, and then eventually made my way back to Australia when the lockdown finally ended. I had only been back in Australia for about a year when I met Miffy in a Discord server. While we barely knew each other, she had wanted to move to Melbourne from Queensland to escape, well, Queensland. And wanting to be helpful and make a new friend, I offered her a place to crash while she found a place to stay. Except, then we had become best friends, and we went to Gloomy to beg him to let her move in with us permanently. And after a year of us living in a small 2-bedroom flat, we moved into our current house. And holy shit, my life is so long. Am I old? Is this, would it be, am I hag? Does hagdom start at 26? Holy shit. We now live in a beautiful house with myself, Gloomy, our cats Peanut and Butter, and Miffy and her cat Mavis. I could not have picked a better chosen family. Having a sister after all this time makes me incredibly happy. After about 2 years of therapy, I now talk to my mom and brothers again, and I'm also on meds to help me deal with my generalized anxiety disorder and my complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Despite all that I've been through, I can actually say that I'm in a place where I feel loved and happy, which is something that I never thought would be achievable. And if you've made it this far in the video, remember to smash that like button. But also, please know that it does actually get better, as cliche as it sounds. I never thought that I would get to where I am in life, and I'm glad that I toughed out the worst of my years to get here. I've been able to grow so much as a person since becoming Snoozy and a VTuber, and I'm just so grateful to have grown so much since then. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you later.